And you can hear me?
I can hear you. I assume you can hear me.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next session, and thanks for joining Ellen and me today. So far, most of the conference has been focused on how to do things. Hi, Sunshine. We want to take a moment to stop and ask the question, should we proceed with things, not just how? So this is intended for primarily low and pro coders at organizations, those who are on the staff of nonprofits and educational institutions. We think it's going to be mostly applicable or most strongly applicable to those of you that identify as the DBMs, like the Razor's Edge database manager, who are looking at expanding your repertoire of technical abilities and services that you can give to your organization. Clearly, Ellen and I are not opposed to customizations. The outcome of this session will not be no, don't ever do them. We want to stop and ask the question, but as I think Heather pointed out this morning, Ellen actually has the top viewed Sky Developer video on YouTube. And so we both feel like this has a place in our work, but we want to stop and ask the question about how to thoughtfully do it and how to go about the work, both for short-term benefits as well as for long-term benefits for the organization. The agenda is pretty easy. We're going to do some introductions and talk about why we're cautious. So we certainly don't want to throw a wet blanket over the exciting 2+ days we've already gone through. As far as I'm concerned, this is the best BB Dev days I've attended. I've had great sessions. We don't want to be a wet blanket and say, no, don't do anything. But we do want to stop and share through our personal stories why we recommend some level of caution as we, there you go, Sunshine. Thanks for the meme. As we do this. And we're going to do this somewhat through our personal stories. And then when it does make sense to proceed, we want to talk about some principles to keep in mind. And then we're hoping to allow some time for some discussion. So let's do the quick usual introductions, and then we'll get into the content. So my name is Bill Connors. I've been a Razor's Edge consultant since 1998. I've been using Razor's Edge since 1995. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my story in a bit, but that's who I am. Ellen?
And I'm Ellen. I have worked in Razor's Edge since 2005, starting as a temp at George Washington's Mount Vernon, and I'm currently at Conservation International, where I've been for the past 11 years.
Thanks, Ellen. Jeannie, thanks for your question. This is equally applicable to BBCRM as it is to Razor's Edge. We're talking concepts here. We're not talking specifically about Razor's Edge or about a particular database or particular programming. Ellen and I both come from the Razor's Edge world, but we really intend this material to apply to whatever database you happen to be using. So let's go ahead and get into it. We want to spend a few minutes here just giving you some of our personal professional stories and what brings us to this moment to provide some context to the principles we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes. It would be very disingenuous of me. In fact, it would be quite dishonest of me if I were to come to a session or a conference like this and say, no, we shouldn't be using any of these tools. There's already enough to do. Let's not take the time to learn and implement these tools. Because I started my whole fabulous career. I have been so fortunate over the past 20+ years that I've been working in this field. I started it because I got my hands on Microsoft Access 1.0. So a Microsoft tool back in the day, I see the smirk on Ellen's face. Yes, it was Access 1.0 in the early to mid 90s. That was the exciting tool that Microsoft was releasing at that time. My job was director of development. I wasn't even a database manager. We didn't even have a database, but I got tied into Access somehow. My boss supported me in going to some events. I actually had to go to the event as a volunteer because my organization couldn't even pay for the training, but my boss let me do that so I could attend the event that was being hosted and I could learn Microsoft Access. So it's tools like Power BI and Power Automate, but back in that day that I got and started on my whole Razor's Edge technical advancement services career. So despite some of the caveats and cautions that I'm going to be giving here in a few minutes, I do recognize that there is a time and a place that organizations have budgets for this kind of work. And I always prefer that we have more options than fewer options. But after Ellen gives a little bit more of her introduction, I'm going to talk about some of the cautions that have come up in my career that bring us to this presentation today. But Ellen, go ahead.
So I have worked in Power Platform, I think, since 2020. It might be later than that. It's all a blur at this point. But like I said, I've worked in RE since 2005. In 2020, I started hearing grumblings about people wanting to use other systems to manage our pipeline. And so I became completely determined to not let that happen. Even after WebView, we still had, some functionality that's not in RE, and I needed a reporting system to stop this from happening, stop the pipeline from being, moved out of RE. So that's when I started BI. And then I moved to Automate, and I've even been able to use the Power Query function in BI. It also works in Excel, and I've done a lot of great things in Excel as well. That journey did involve a lot of my personal time to learn this. It is not easy. Both Power systems have a very steep learning curve, and you should know that going ahead. You're going to be so frustrated. I almost threw my laptop against the wall many times while I was learning it. It was super frustrating, but I had that motivation. I was determined to be right, which many of you may agree that is a very strong motivator, and that Razor's Edge could do what we needed. And since then, like I said, I put my personal time in. I didn't want to present something that was going to fail. I needed to know how to use it ahead of time. So that was a big time investment. Also, the upkeep, troubleshooting, data checks have also been a big time commitment. And it's my favorite part of my job now, but it is a big part. Like, it does take up a lot of time for me. And you can still have the same frustrations. Fundraisers are impatient when everything doesn't work right away. And if you think you're furious when they don't use RE, you will be really furious when they don't use things that you put this much work into, and it still does happen. So overall, the efficiencies, the improvements, the reports I've been able to make, the small things I've been able to do that people are delighted with has really been incredibly satisfying, and was worth all the difficult journey and late nights and 15-hour days that it took to get it up and running.
So the reason we have the picture of the thinker on the screen, and again, the point of this, the title of this presentation is "Just because you can doesn't mean you should," is we want to talk about some reasons and some things to think about before you plunge into this kind of work and learning these kinds of tools. Again, first based on some of our professional experiences, and then we'll move into some general principles. So as I noted, I've been a Razor's Edge consultant since 1998. And in the early years, Crystal Reports was the big fancy tool that we all used well before Power BI. Both when Razor's Edge supported word merges directly in the software, as well as afterwards, of course, there's always been the ability to do some pretty fancy stuff with Word. If you're not familiar with conditional statements or the if then else capabilities, there's always been the ability to have very fancy, sophisticated, complicated word merges. And in my early years as a consultant, I just plunged right in and I would help clients and organizations create those. But what I discovered over time was that I was sometimes creating capabilities that in the moment seemed terrific and were just what the organization was asking for, but they weren't able to support them. Once I was gone, they were dead in the water if they needed any changes or any modifications whatsoever. And so they were either dependent on me to continue it, or the work fell away because they weren't willing to continue to pay a consultant to keep the work going. So what I ended up doing over time as I became more mature and smarter as a consultant is I would stop and evaluate, does this organization have the staffing, the money, the budget, the sophistication to warrant the full capabilities that I might be able to bring to them to make things run better? If I write a crystal report, are they going to be able to support it and change it and modify it as fundraisers and needs and campaigns and funds change over time? If I write very sophisticated acknowledgement letters with a lot of conditions in it, is someone going to be able to go into it and see the nested if then else's and rework that logic? Or no, this is a smaller or mid-sized organization that just isn't going to have the budget and the staffing capability to support that. And I actually purposely will build less sophisticated solutions for some clients because I feel like it serves them the best in the long run. So for example, I often will have fundraisers come to me and say, Bill, I want a one-button report. I just want to be able to go into Razor's Edge and push this button and there's my report. Well, first of all, the fundraisers often have a difficult time defining what they even want, let alone do they have the budgets to be able to build that, let alone what is going to be the long-term plan as their needs and interests change. And so I have no qualms with some organizations saying, listen, the best way to get a report when you go to the board is to run these 6 Razor's Edge reports or this combination of queries and grab these numbers and figures and then put them into an Excel template. No, it's not the fanciest way to do it. Yes, there are better tools on the market, ideally, to produce such reports, but it's a workable solution that the database manager at that organization today, or most likely that they're going to be able to replace the DBM at the budget and in the market that they're in, is going to be able to support. Another issue that I've had over the years in my work is email. I've made the joke before, but it seems like a lot of our fundraisers want to be professional email people, not professional fundraisers, and prefer to spend more time in their inbox than in the database. But I have some serious concerns about us spoon feeding fundraisers in email. First of all, in my work with doing screen sharing and sitting side by side with constituents in the pre-pandemic ways, I have seen a lot of inboxes. And I have seen inboxes full of hundreds, if not thousands, of unread emails. I think just adding to that email trash in a lot of cases doesn't accomplish anything. I even have problems as a consultant getting paid because I invoice my clients via email, and fundraisers are often so bad paying attention to their email that I don't get paid unless I remind them and call them, literally call them to confirm they've received my invoice. I have great concerns about the security of email. I mean, who among us doesn't have our smartphone and have email on our smartphone? And yet we will, we all know you don't email credit card numbers and social security numbers, but then we think nothing of creating these big reports and these big exports and sticking them in emails and sending them to fundraisers. So I personally have a big problem with emails based on my experience. And then the final point I make before I'll turn it back over to Ellen is, listen, I consider myself a fundraiser first. I was a fundraiser before I got into the database side. Literally, my best friends, Sean and Gail, are fundraisers. But fundraisers are lousy at this stuff as a general rule. I mean, how many of us have gotten the email that says, hey, Bill, I need to do a mailing of all donors last year. And we have to parse out and sit down and figure out what all those details mean. So fundraisers are not often very good at this kind of work. And so it becomes incumbent upon those of us that have these kind of technical skills in this data mindset to work with our fundraisers to unpack whether these things really should be done or not. And I would encourage us, as we sit down and look at these tools that we have been blessed with and that are available to work with our ecosystem, to question, based on the reality of working in nonprofits and in fundraising operations, whether it always makes sense to move forward with these tools. Ellen?
I could not agree with Bill more about email. I absolutely hate managing tasks and systems and emails. Every time someone says something about email, I'm like, how else can we do this besides email? If you've never heard of it, there's a book called A World Without Email, and it's amazing and excellent and a great tool for, I think, for people in our profession. So check that out. But, you know, there's still people that are just not going to get out of email. And you're talking about maybe it's the older people, maybe it's, you know, leadership, so you can't tell them no. So it can be nice to have some small some small automations that send people emails and they get so excited. They think it's the greatest thing ever. And what I've also found is some of those things require fundraisers to be very accurate and timely in their data entry. So the emails, you can't tell Automate, add this line, take this line away. It has to be in the database or it does not exist, like we've said for so long. So it can be a way to get people more engaged if you're talking about, like, they know that this, like, their meetings aren't going to be on the weekly meeting email summary if, you know, they're not an RE, so they have to do it. So I have found that to be an upside. It's also really fun to combat common complaints about RE by saying, yeah, we can do that. Let me show you how. So that's always fun with the power tools. And a couple other things to think about before we move on to the next section. Again, the learning curve is really high. Be ready to not be good at it immediately. And Blackbaud is never going to make all the changes to RE that you want. And they shouldn't. I've seen things that people are like, oh, vote for my idea. I want it to do this. And I'm like, I would never want it to do that. So we don't want RE to make, you know, make it work right for your organization, even though you might think it's terrible, it doesn't do something. In order to stay loose enough for everybody to use it, they're never going to do everything. So you're going to have to find other tools. And this is one option. And another thing to keep in mind, technology is advancing rapidly. If you want to stay competitive in the future, you cannot just know database view. You are going to have to learn new things. Maybe it's not this. Maybe you're going to retire before you need to learn it. But if you're planning on continuing your career, just database view or, you know, Excel documents is not a long-term solution. So just like all platforms, it's going to evolve, and it's really important to evolve with it. Bill?
Thanks, Ellen. So we're a third into the presentation, and we've been telling you our professional stories and our professional experiences to encourage you, before you move forward with these kinds of projects, to stop and think. And here's how we would summarize what we've talked about so far. Organizations of different sizes and means will evaluate these questions differently. Number two is, Ellen and I love you unicorns out there, and we consider ourselves unicorns as well. A lot of the folks who do this work do it because we have intelligence and passion and abilities that a lot of our peers in these similar roles don't have. And we want to encourage you to be your best you, to learn as much as you can, and to do as much as you can. Again, that's exactly how I started on this terrific career many years ago. But our caution of this would be, don't create systems your orgs can't support in your absence. When you do create them, there's a whole set of best practices you should follow in doing so. And so don't get so carried away with the technology and the thrill of making things that you forget the business analysis and case that brings us to these organizations to have the jobs that we have. So with that summary on the table that we've talked about, let's move into some more practical, some more specific ideas about evaluating customizations. So the first is the need legitimate? Is it legitimate enough? Now, Jeannie, you're in BBCRM. My apologies, I don't know what the equivalent is there. But in the Razor's Edge world, everyone knows about all the table values and all the attributes that we have in our systems or that we've inherited in systems because somebody had a good idea that this needed to be tracked and then it was entered 3 times and then forgotten. Is the customization, is the report, we're talking about Power BI here every bit as much as we're talking about Power Automate or any of the other programming tools. Is the need, is the request legitimate enough to invest in the work, or is it going to be the next abandoned table or next abandoned attribute? We've talked about our concerns about email. Is emailing it really a good alternative when you consider security, when you consider what the Razor's Edge or what the database can already do? Can management articulate a specific goal, a specific objective, a specific outcome that will be more successfully achieved by this customization than moving ahead without it? Is there a more workable, sustainable alternative? So people have been talking during the conference in the Razor's Edge world, at least, around some of the more popular customizations or Power Automate solutions being, for example, sending an email of the daily gift report. What's wrong with instead directing the fundraisers to the work center, to a list in the work center? Is that going to be a more workable, sustainable alternative? I gave you the example of doing the reporting in Excel rather than spending hours and hours and hours in Power BI. Could that work? Can you do part of the work instead of all of the work? Heather this morning in the user group for the low coders talked about we tend to be perfectionists, and I'm as guilty of that as anyone, Heather. But are there ways we can do a good enough job that's going to be good enough without having to have every I dotted and T crossed and field filled out? Perhaps the compromise is, okay, to Ellen's point, yes, we do need to send an email letting the fundraisers know about the gifts that have come in. But in the email, we're going to link them back to the database for the details on the gifts or on the constituent. We're not going to allow the email that we send to have every field about every constituent, about every gift that's just answered in the email. So maybe that's a compromise as to what is the best way to move forward here. How does this particular idea fit into the priorities of everything else that you should be doing if you're the Razor's Edge database manager, for example? Is your security in tip-top shape? Blackbaud keeps adding role types to the web view and not telling us. Have you gone into the web view to make sure all those roles are set up as tightly as they should be? Is the reason that your fundraisers are asking for an email of information because you've not trained them how to use the work center? And if instead of spending 20 hours on a customization on a Power Automate, maybe if you spent 2 hours delivering them a training about the work center, maybe they would be better served. Instead of worrying about how your Power BI report or your Power Automate customization is going to live beyond you, what about the day-to-day posting and reconciling of gifts? What about the month-to-month direct mail files that need to be sent to your direct mail vendor? Have you created the documentation to keep the fundamental processes of Razor's Edge going once you leave the organization? Is there cleanup that needs to be done that would actually be more worthwhile to do than another isolated customization? And then what about your organization when you're not there? Do they have the budget to replace you at your skill level, regardless of what your pay is? If you're willing to do work above your pay grade with these tools, is your organization going to be able to replace you with someone who can do that same kind of work, either for what they're willing to pay for the position or what the market is going to be able to provide? So if you're in San Francisco or New York or DC or Chicago or London or Sydney or Toronto, probably there's a lot of people who can do what you do. If you're in a smaller market, even if they'd be willing to pay, would they be able to find them? And does management understand that? Fundraisers are great people. They're often not great managers. There's not a so often fundraisers become managers because they were good at raising money, not because they were good at running offices and making management decisions. So, does your fundraising leadership really understand that these would be the cases? And then a final idea, and then I'll turn it back over to Ellen, is frankly, would it just be better to outsource it? So, we all know Austin Brown. Austin is a leader in this community. She works for a consulting firm. Maybe it would just be better to take this great idea and to have a firm that has the expertise, that does this every day, that will be there perhaps beyond your relationship with the organization, do the work for you. So these would be some ideas I would suggest thinking about. Ellen?
And my next piece is a little evaluating, but this is based on tips that I learned along the way. The first one is get ahead of your management on the evaluation of these tools. If nobody's making grumblings yet, if you can spend some time, it might be your personal time or your downtime, looking at these things, seeing, is there anything I need that these tools can do? It would be really good for you to come to them and be the expert instead of them coming to you and saying, we need more things. You're not, it's not fulfilling what we need. So that can be a really good way to approach this. Take this opportunity to evaluate your data. Data cleanup projects that are lurking at the bottom of your to-do list will need to move to the top, because these programs require flawless data for the most part. Like, you're telling a computer what to do, and so it's got to be exactly what you're telling it to do. So this is not going to hide if your data's dirty. This is not a workaround for that. Make sure that you include your time in any evaluations. The training would be a lot of time, but then also the upkeep. You don't just make these and then, let them loose and you never have to do anything. You do have to maintain them. You do have to troubleshoot them. You do have to create data checks to make sure that they're going to work right if people make mistakes. And if you're going to take on this new skill set, how will you be properly compensated when you do learn it? Because it is a higher level. It is a whole new skill set that puts you at a higher level and more desirable. And so you should make sure to have that conversation as well before you implement all these things that you can't untie yourself from. Understand your organization's Microsoft licensing. I've had some trouble, like for BI, if you want to share reports, you have to have a pro license, which I'm not sure that they're that expensive, but you do have to have them. Everybody who's going to use it needs to have one. For Power Automate, there's premium connectors. I'm not sure of the cost there, but you do need to understand what you have in your licensing and factor that into any costs. And also making sure that when you're building these things and you want to share them, that they are not built for just you. Meaning that things that are in your Power Automate account, make sure you share them with one person so you're not the only one and you're hit by the bus, as I call it, file, that someone else can use it. Same with BI. Don't build them off of things on your local drive because you can't share those in the cloud easily. If you're more comfortable going the consultant route, remember you will need to include budget for upkeep. Again, these aren't things you can just build and then they can just build it for you. And then if you don't know the systems, like if something breaks, you're going to need them to help you fix it. So make sure that that is part of the deal with any consultants you sign up with. And most importantly is to have purpose. Identify a problem and solve it. I've seen, like, when I just try to learn something, I did not do well. Like, having a thing that I was trying to accomplish is how I found that I was most successful. You also don't want to create a bunch of things that nobody's asking for. So, have a specific project, attack it from there, learn along the way. You'll Google a million, errors, and their answers are mostly all out there. But I think that's the most important, is to have a purpose, have a goal, and go from there. Bill?
Great, thanks. So again, we are not saying don't ever do these projects. We're saying step back and think about it and be thoughtful so that the work you're about to do for the organization will outlive you and will be supportable and continuable as you move on to bigger and better things. So if you do decide to proceed, these are some thoughts about how to do so. Let's see, a little mixed up on there. Okay, so don't make it more complicated than your successors can support. Again, please keep in mind what I've said earlier about who your organization is going to be able to hire when you leave, and build it for them, not necessarily at the full ability that you have to make it sing.
You also want to start simple with small victories. Baby steps are crucial. Like, don't say you're going to build, like, you're going to connect Power BI to the RE connector and build a whole system of reports, or that you're going to do, something super complicated and automate. That's not a good way. It's just kind of setting you up for failure. Pick something simple that people want, that will be an easier win to move forward. You really can do simple things and blow people's mind, which is, again, really great. And job security. And don't just create something that is just for you to, like, oh, this is a bright, shiny new object that nobody asked for.
Make it adaptable. Things will change. Fundraisers will change. The Raiser's Edge will change. Your campaigns, funds, and appeals will change. Even the fundraiser who is there is going to change their minds and have new needs. So build it to be adaptable, not hard-coded for the current setup and their current request.
Yep. To go along with that, kind of the same idea, simplify, don't further customize. For example, if you wanted to start doing your acknowledgement letters in this process, is the reason you want to do it because you have 25 different letter types that have to be done by 17 different funds and attributes, and trying to fit that into a Power Automate is probably going to be a nightmare. So if you have the backup from people in your department to do things like this, take the opportunity to say, like, acknowledgement letters should thank people, and they should provide tax receipts when that's important. Maybe we don't need all of these letters. Like, how can we take this opportunity to simplify, to make sure that, like Bill said, it will be adaptable, it will not be so susceptible to bad data, and you can simplify everyone's life that way.
Drive users into the software as much as you can. Don't create end runs around it. So Alex did a great presentation about how the custom reports that he's doing, he's providing access to them in the interface, not outside the interface. We've seen examples of when you send an email that basically the user needs to click on a link in the email to drive them back into the database to see the details about the gift or about the constituent, that we're not creating options outside Raiser's Edge or outside the database, but options to drive people back into the database where they're supposed to be. Document, document. There are some tips here. I won't walk through all of them right now, but please leave documentation. Don't just think the software is going to stand by itself. The best example I can give you for those of you that are Razor's Edge users, or those of you that have inherited other people's queries, other people's reports, other people's setups in mail, what's the first thing you do? Well, why is it set up this way? What am I supposed to change each time? Why was it done this way rather than this other way? Create a documentation so that this can be sustainable past you. Consider the documentation an integral part of developing the customization, not an add-on task to be done later if and when there's time. And then finally, for me on this, train others. If the customization needs to be changed, have someone else in your office do it rather than you do it. If the Power BI report needs to be updated, teach someone else how to do it. Don't make it all about you. Use this as an opportunity to bring your database associate or your IT team or someone else with any capability into the conversation and let them do it with you as well.
And I just want to add on to the conversation about driving people to the database. You can also put links, create hyperlinks in Power BI. So what I've tried to do in BI is create a lot of just like tables to replace people exporting the same thing out of Razor's Edge constantly and into Excel, and having a million different Excel sheets with donor information lurking all over OneDrives. And if you can drive them to, one way to drive them to use that instead is if they can just click that button. If they're looking at an opportunity level record and they can just click it and it's going to open RE directly from there. That means they'll edit it faster. They can look at it faster. It's a better tool than Excel if they can do that. So that's available in BI as well. So just the last thought from me to think about. Pursuing these projects incorporates a lot of different considerations, as we've talked about today. You need to incorporate your time and effort into any decision making, but what is best for the organization is the primary driver. And this could go in both directions. If you're super excited to learn this, but your organization doesn't have the resources to support it, it's probably not the best idea. Conversely, if you don't want to learn it and you just want to stay in RE, but your organization needs more than you can provide, then again, consultant route some other way, give it a try, see what happens. But you need to serve the needs of the organization in either direction.
Great. And so with that, I have been keeping a little bit of an eye on the chat, and there have been terrific ideas there. We've got about 8 minutes left, and we'd like to invite some discussion. So Rob, if there are any particular questions that you want to bring up, Rob is our moderator in the background, everyone. If there are any questions you want to bring to our attention, or if anyone would like to use the raise your hand feature, which is at the bottom of the Goldcast platform, we'd be welcome to invite you to come on stage as well and to share your thoughts on this matter. There's a lot of people actively participating in chat. Anyone want to come on stage? Rob, any questions?
No, you know what? I've been reviewing everything in the chat, and there's not really a lot of questions. There's a lot of great comments, though.
Yeah.
And a lot of people having a good time in the chat, which is always great to see.
Good.
Also. So no questions. So right now, if anybody has any specific questions or further comments, good, bad, please share them here. You could either do it in chat or you could even join us. I see some of my customers. Hello, how are you?
There are a lot of names here in the chat. Anyone like to come and participate? You won't be stealing our thunder. We'd love to have you come and share some of the ideas you've put here. Again, there's a raise your hand feature at the bottom of the screen where you can invite yourself to the stage. We'd love to have you. While we're waiting on that, if you did not attend Ben Wong's session yesterday on security, I would highly recommend it. I was keeping an eye eye on both that session and the adaptive card session, and it seemed to be about evenly split. So if you went to the adaptive card session, I would really recommend you watch Ben's session about security for this kind of work later today or sometime soon.
I see a question from Ben. Tips for saying no to management when you realize you're not someone who can create these customizations. I think that if they're asking for it and they really want it, then your job would be not no. No is like not is, here, let me present a different option instead of saying no, I can't do it. To say that, go back to the training. You're going to have to invest in training because I don't have the skill set to do this right now. Or, go see Austin. She does a great job. So get a consultant to come in and do it instead. Or say, what is it you're trying to do? And then if it's something you can do a different way, present that as an idea as well. I think it's really important. Some people, make sure that you've exhausted everything in WebView that you can possibly use. Again, Power Query that you use to build Power BI, you can also use it in Excel. And I've made great tools that way. So if you don't feel comfortable with BI or, automate, maybe look into just learning Power Query in Excel, and you can make some dashboards and do some really cool gift processing files as well there. So present something different instead of just saying, no, I can't do this.
I entirely agree, Ellen. Thank you. Sometimes it's not no, it's not now, or it could be a maybe, but. Another approach I like to do is to talk about the pros and cons. If I can work on this for you, and here's what it's going to cost, and here's what I'm not going to be doing while I work on this. So you have a choice. I can either work on this project, which will take 20 hours of development time, and in the meantime, the following mailings won't go out or the following cleanup won't be done. What would you like me to do instead? Another point I would make on this is that managers in fundraising generally were fundraisers themselves. So a fundraiser director of development can manage the annual giving person really well because they probably did annual giving. They don't generally know the kind of work we do and that we're responsible for. A lot of fundraisers, in my experience, seem to think it's our job to sit there and be ready for their requests. They don't realize that there are plenty of other activities we need to be doing as well that they don't know about in order to keep things running smoothly. And so I also use this as an opportunity for education. Well, I'd love to work on that for you, but security is a mess, or all these code tables are screwed up, or the major gift officers are screaming. And so I need to work on those instead. So those would be some other strategies to work with management.
Cool. Thanks, Bill and Ellen. I've got a couple others in Q&A. And if you do have something that I may have missed, throw it in Q&A, because I'm realizing now that I'm looking through the chat and it's getting buried by all the great comments in there. But real quick, is this deck going to be available on your website, Bill? I know it's going to be available on BB Dev Day's website for perpetuity, but are you planning on putting this up on your resources page? I
will, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Christopher Horn has got a question thinking about the transition to WebView. Are low-code solutions likely to become a required skill for REDBAs and DBM positions going forward? With how often Power Automate and Sky API are given as a solution to a changed amount of functionality, the implication seems to be that it's the expectation, or it will be the expectation.
I'll jump in quickly and say
I think you're going to have to do something.
Oh, go ahead, Ellen.
Go ahead, Bill. No, I was just going to say, I don't think that this particular skill set, but something will be required. You'll need to learn something new in the future to stay. Again, like, you can't just know database view. You're going to have to learn something new to stay competitive, I think.
Yeah.
And then I would say quickly, I don't think these kinds of skills are going to become the norm for database managers now.
And then to follow up on that, Ben actually has one in the chat where he said tips for actually saying no to management who realize you're someone who can create customizations.
Rob, I think that's the question that Ellen and I were answering a couple of minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, though.
Gotcha. So on that, we are wrapping up on time, and I'm going to pop in a survey for everyone. I'd like to thank Bill and Ellen for their time. Any last thoughts, Bill and Ellen, before we depart?
Thanks everyone for coming.
I agree. Thank you all. We appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate yours. And thank you, everybody. We had a packed house here for the day. So I appreciate everyone attending.
Thanks.
All right. Have a good rest of BB Dev Days. All right.